Welcome to Ethical Edge Insights, Conversations with ChangeMakers, a space for deeply reflective conversations with those shaping our world. Here we explore their journeys, their greatest challenges, their most significant contributions to date, the contributions they seek to make, and how ethics have shown up along the way. Join us as we uncover the stories that shape our shared future. So welcome, Hugh. Thank you for joining me for this chat. So Hugh Breakey is a ethicist from Australia. And we came together because I was just reaching out randomly to people who were ethicists because of the work in the Coaching Ethics Forum. And not many people actually return emails, but Hugh did. So we've had an ongoing relationship in and around the forum and the Ethical Edge Insights. And actually, Hugh is the master ethicist in the magazine. So thank you for joining me. And would you like to tell us a little more about your journey and what inspired you to be the ethicist that you are? And go back as far as you want, wherever that lands for you.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Wendy-Ann. It's great to be here and chatting with you. So whatever my journey was, it was a very roundabout sort of one. I think when I finished school, I wanted to become an astronaut and I went off to do engineering at university. And then I got a little bit tired of all of the math. Turned out there was a lot of math. And I went and did arts drama for a while. So I worked on stage productions and doing acting and directing for the theatre, which I enjoyed a lot. But it was hard to get paid work in that industry when I came out the back end, although I had a sort of lovely time while I was in it. And so I was then moved into doing a little bit more writing, so writing play scripts and then trying to write film scripts, which I did have a production that was optioned at one point, which was exciting for a while. But these things often die in pre-production, and mine did. And then I started writing, starting to try and write novels, although I didn't have much experience with that at the time. But by that point, I had bumped into my girlfriend at the time, subsequently became my wife, and she was always a creative person, now very successful writer. And she was reading a book called Sophie's World, which is a pop philosophy book. It's a philosophy book that's kind of written for teenagers, but is actually pretty heavy going in terms of the philosophy in various parts. It's on metaphysics and epistemology, so it can get a bit heavy, but wonderful read, especially for someone like me. She passed it to me and she said, "Look, I can't get into this, but I think it'll work for you." And so that was it. I was 27 at that point, and I literally read what I would call sort of genuine philosophy, genuine philosophical argument to that point in my life. And it was just an extraordinary experience of realizing other people just think about the same things that you do, and you kind of thought it was just you, and then hear all these people thinking in much more profound and deep ways, but about the same things that sort of roll around in your mind. So that was it for me. I went back to university, got a graduate diploma and then an honours and a PhD in applied ethics and political philosophy, and was always interested in just the ethics and moral philosophy side of things. I think sometimes people think of ethicists and they think that we're like particularly morally righteous people or something. And in my experience, that's definitely not the case. I actually think there's some empirical evidence on this as well that suggests it's definitely not the case. But I think sometimes it can be that you're trying to work things out a lot as you go along. So you're fiercely thinking about the stuff you do, and that doesn't mean you don't do a lot of stuff that on reflection you think I absolutely shouldn't have done that. But it does mean you think hard about what you're doing, and you think hard about the way it's landing with other people and the way they're treating you and what might be the reasons for that. And one of the interesting things about moral philosophy is it's especially when it gets very, very applied. So this the type of stuff I do, and you can be a moral philosopher and do really, really esoteric, abstract, very, very theoretical stuff because it's philosophy. So you can just keep asking why, about
Mhm.
anything, and you will inevitably get to just incredibly abstract questions about whether claims about morality have truth properties or not, which is a really good question, but a very abstract one. It's not going to change the way you treat your neighbor or your partner. But I work on the much more sort of applied side of things, and in some ways, it's a little bit like if you have an op-ed writer that you really like and that you think is trying to be really, really fair-minded and really, really informed, and is quite happy to write 10 to 12,000 word pieces on particular issues and try and really canvass everything. In some ways, that's sort of what the applied moral philosopher like me is in the business of trying to do. And it's often not, especially when I do stuff that's more public facing, because I write a fair bit in various places. And often you're not really trying to change anybody's mind. You're just trying to say, look, here are all the things you might be wanting to think about. Here are all the things that other people, how they might be understanding and trying to process the things that you're doing and the way it's looking to them. And then you can sort of go off and make up your own mind about where you want to take that. But I think that's sort of the main thing that I'm trying to do, especially when I'm writing for a public audience. When I'm writing sort of my own sort of scholarly research, sometimes it can be a little bit like that as well, and sometimes it's sort of a bit more. It'll have an actual position that it's staking out and try to persuade the reader that it's the right one. So that's kind of how I managed to sort of wander into this. And then I was very fortunate when I finished my PhD. There are lots of very, very smart people who get PhDs. So if anyone out there is listening to this and thinking, that sounds like a super job, maybe that's a career path for me. It may well be, but it is not an easy career path. There are lots of smart people that get PhDs in moral philosophy and in philosophy more broadly, and it's tough to get employment. And I was very fortunate in two respects. One, I managed to get employment doing what I love. But the other one is I work purely in research. So I'm not actually I don't have students at all. Teaching is just awesome. It is a wonderful thing to teach philosophy. But marking philosophy essays is really, really hard. So I wasn't unhappy about moving away from that. So I've been sort of very lucky in that since I finished my PhD way back in 2010, so for the last 15 years now, I've just been employed in research-only positions. And that has some aspects of it that are unbelievably fun because it just means that I just get to think about stuff and argue about stuff most of the time with people and try and work out what's going on in very interesting and controversial areas. But it also has some odd facets of it, which is that a lot of academics can really research kind of what they want. So if you're a teaching academic and you just have a certain amount of research that you do, you can just look at a particular area and think, well, that looks interesting. I wonder if maybe I might be able to write something on that. Like them, I have those feelings, but unlike them, I do not have the time to actually do that work. Why? Well, because I'm purely research, I'm just funded by external projects. So the overwhelming majority of work that I do is because somebody wants me to be doing it or wants my team. I have an interdisciplinary research team that I work with at our institute, the Institute for Ethics, Governance and Law at Griffith University. And the work that we do is just work that we are funded to do because someone in business or the corporate world or someone in government and regulatory bodies, perhaps with NGOs as partners as well, wants us to be doing it and is willing to pay for us to be doing it or be partners on a grant that'll go to the federal government for us to be doing it. So it does mean that I tend to be really quite focused in what I'm doing because the work that I'm doing is work that I'm doing as part of a project that often has lots and lots of other people and lots of moving parts and lots of project partners who are very interested in seeing what the outputs are going to be. And so that's what I do.
Can you give us an example of what a project might look like when you're researching your area?
Yeah, no, I'd love to. So one project that we've just about finished now, we're still maybe a few weeks away from submitting the final edited collection that will be coming out of it, the scholarly work, but all of the major reports have been written for it. And it was a look at the Australian construction industry, which have been having a whole bunch of sort of not quite scandals, but there have obviously been big problems in high-rise residentials in a lot of Western places around the globe. With cladding catching on fire and just really horrific things happening. And in Australia, there are particular versions of those types of problems that are coming along at the same time as we have a housing crisis, which is to say we need more building to be done pretty urgently in Australia. And so the project was looking at the professionalism of the different professions involved, and also the ways that they were interacting with each other, because sort of construction industries, like a lot of other areas, think of working in a hospital, for example, you have multiple different professionals who all have their own particular way of doing things and their own ideas on how things should best be done. And they're all having to come together to sort of create this shared goal at the end of it, which is going to be this terrific residential high rise that people are going to live in and have investments in, and they are going to have a positive experience out of both of those things. And so the project was sort of looking at, okay, how are the systems in place allowing these people and encouraging these people to be ethical, and in what ways might it be stymieing or preventing or making it really, really hard or really, really risky for them to do the right thing, do the quality thing that they want to do. And so our project looked at a whole array. I think we had partners from 4 different other universities, and we looked at I think it was 14 professions across the whole lifespan, from the very beginning of your developers with your architects and your engineers, all the way to the very end, even with, for example, strata managers. And even the strata managers, so they're the people that help the what's called in Australia the body corporate, which is the collection of lot owners, manage the space. Even though they happen coming at the very end, and you might think, well, are they actually contributing to the way that these buildings are made? It turns out they kind of are, because the strata managers have a very important role, because the body corporate, for its first couple of years, is engaged in looking at defects that need to be rectified. And if they're found in the first couple of years, then it's the developer or the builder's responsibility to rectify those defects. But if they're not found in the next couple of years, then that impost of money, and it can be very, very large amounts of money, will then just fall to the body corporate itself. The lot owners will then be on the hook for what they need to do at that point. And the problem is there that the developer is the person who hires the strata manager in the first place. When the developer first hires the strata manager, the developer owns all of the lots, so they contract the strata manager, and then over time the lots are sold, and the ordinary lot owners, people like you and me, buy them, or we become part of the body corporate. But that strata manager has been contracted by the developer, and it might be quite a lucrative engagement for them to be part of that. And they might be hoping that they will continue to be the strata manager that the developer is going to be directing traffic towards for the next 10 or 20 years. So they have a really good reason to remain on good terms with that developer. And that might be something of an incentive not to go judiciously and proactively chasing down all of the defects during that period, because that might not be what the developer wants to be happening, even though it's very much in the interest of the people who will come to be all of the lot owners, and in a sense the clients of the strata manager. Clients is sort of in parentheses here, because the strata manager, unlike an accountant or a lawyer, is just not professionalized in the same way. And so there's something we might call a quasi-profession or a para-profession. And there's sort of there are very good reasons why sometimes we move someone towards being a profession or not. Meaning that they have a code of ethics, they have educational requirements and all these types of things. But at the same time, while it's useful for us to have those type of quasi-professions or emerging professions, it can be really dangerous, because people can think that they are protected in the way that they would be protected by a lawyer or an accountant, who absolutely has a legal duty to act in your best interest and can be on the receiving end of very serious penalties if they're found to have breached your best interest duty, their obligations to look after your best interests. But not so for a strata manager. They're not caught up in the same governance system and are not on the hook in the same ways. We actually did a project, that was the project we just finished, and we did one several years ago on financial advisors in the Australian context. And obviously that's very much the same sort of problem, if you think about it, was people engaged with financial advisors thinking they were a lot like lawyers or accountants, but they were not like lawyers and accountants. Some of them, of course, were wonderfully ethical people that treated their clients exceedingly well and made them lots and lots of really good investments. But some of them absolutely weren't, and they simply weren't seeing themselves as being professionals, and they definitely weren't bound by any of the professional duties or the various types of governance tools that we would use to make sure that vulnerable clients are being sort of looked after and protected. So that's a couple of the projects.
That makes me think about coaching in parallel, actually. So where it sits, is it? Would you call it one of those quasi-professions?
It probably is, because it probably does operate. I mean, one of the ethical reasons is there's lots of sort of theories about why we have professions the way we do. And some of those theories are kind of cynical, right? They can be like, well, it's pretty handy if you're part of a service industry and you can all rally together and say, only us, we're the only ones that are allowed to do this service. Then you just have a monopoly on the supply, and that's an extremely lucrative thing to have. And no doubt that has been a feature of the development of professions over the years. But from the flip side, there has also been a lot of people who wanted professions to become more professional because your ordinary clients are extremely vulnerable a lot of the time when they engage with professionals for a bunch of reasons. Some just because of the nature of the interaction, because if you're my lawyer, I might be telling you all sorts of extremely confidential stuff about what I'm planning to do and what I've previously done that I want you to look after. But as well as there's that interactive aspect, there's also just the sheer fact that in most cases, the lawyer just has an enormous amount of expertise that I don't have. That's the reason I went to the lawyer in the first place. If I had the lawyer's expertise, I wouldn't need to come to them. I don't have it, so I come to them. And then it's a question, what are they going to use that expertise for? If they want to use that expertise to make problems for me, to give me bad advice and wind up lining their pockets with lots and lots of money by getting me to do things that are outrageously silly, but I don't know they are, then they really have a lot of power to do that. And so in a way, professionals are people we kind of have to trust. There's just sort of no other option. We can't just go and get all of the expertise we need to be able to look after ourselves in that situation. And sometimes we can't even judge the quality of the service even after the service. If we go along to the doctor and they say, I think you should do this and it'll get rid of your cancer, and we do it and it doesn't get rid of the cancer, it may be that it was the right diagnosis and the right course of treatment, and the doctor did absolutely everything they could, and it just didn't work. We don't know because we're just patients. We haven't got that expertise, and we have to kind of trust that the doctor is doing the right thing. Of course, we can go and get second opinions and stuff like that and try and triangulate. But at the end of the day, we are really putting our hands putting our lives in the hands of the professional. And so I think, yeah, there is a fair bit of parallel there with the coaches. There's a lot of vulnerability that arises in the interaction that the client has. Even just the speaking and the talking and the touching and the guiding and all of those things that might happen in various different types of coaching. And then there is also just that level of trust where the person the coachee is needing to just put a level of trust and investment and reliance in the person that is speaking to them, and just needs to be able to think, if I follow what this person is saying, they know what they're doing, they have my best interests at heart, and if I work with them, then we might accomplish something that's really terrific for both of us. And again, they need to take a bit of a leap of faith. And again, we have the coaching perhaps sitting in that kind of quasi-professional space where no doubt, and I think probably lots of people go into coaching precisely because of the calling to help other people. And so the overwhelming majority of coaches, I suspect, are going to respond to the trust that's put into them in incredibly powerful and beneficial ways. But at the same time, there will be ones who aren't, and there will be ones also perhaps who have good intentions, but who wind up not treating the coachee the way that they deserve and to the standards that they could reasonably expect.
I mean, your story about, what's going to happen with coaching, we don't know. It's all a process, and we'll see. But your story about how ethicists show up and what people think of them, I think was particularly important and really good for us to hear. When it's like, I think people who engage in ethics, they're not Puritans, and they're not they're not innocents. And it is really important that they're thinking things through. And that's the idea about it, isn't it? It's not this rule book. It's not that you can do this, you should do this, you shouldn't do this, but it is really how your thinking impacts what you end up doing, and who's impacted by that as well. We have to keep reminding ourselves that that's exactly what it is, because so many professions are set up, like even the psychological profession, because I'm a registered psychologist, and it has a code of ethics, but it has some legal rules set in that code of ethics that I have to take care of. And so here it is, a law-abiding kind code of ethics that you have to know which is actually law and which is ethics, and it's all in the one document.
Yeah. Yeah, no, they can be very complex things to navigate, and it often is the way that we'll codify a particular profession's obligations, and it just will often be that some of them just are legally binding, and there are some absolute rules, and others are not legally binding, but might still have some legal import later on if there were to be a court case or something, and others that really are just ethical ones, which means the person should be doing them, but there's sort of no legal obligation on them. And then often, just to make matters more complicated, codes of ethics are often framed in really aspirational ways. And in some ways that makes sense, because you are appealing to people's sort of honor and their nobility and their compassion and all of those types of things. So the more that you can highlight to them, look, there's this terrific thing that you can be doing where you're, as the doctor, as the lawyer, as the coach, where people are able to trust you, and you are able to do extraordinary services for them because of that trust and because of your expertise, and that can create these wonderful things that happen in the world. So you want them to be aspirational in that sense, but it can also mean that sometimes they phrase the duties and obligations in really strong terms, like asking for really, really high standards. And at the same time, you might want people to be aiming for that, but we are all human beings, and we all have things that we need to do, and we all have time pressures, and we all have multiple commitments. So it isn't the case that absolutely everything has to be done to the very highest standard, even though sometimes codes of ethics are written as if that is actually a legitimate thing that might happen. When anybody that's ever done anything ever should be able to say, okay, that's something that it's nice to aim at, but the reality is that life is going to be complicated and difficult cases are going to arise, and we're going to have to make some decisions, and sometimes they won't be exactly the right ones. We won't breach any of the minimum standards. We'll get the legal stuff right, but there's probably a few times we'll take moral missteps, and the best we can do in those cases is just to learn and move on from the experience and do better next time.
Yeah, so I was just kind of noting that in a conversation I had last week after a webinar that I'd given that ended up causing a bit of a disturbance. And I just was, it was like, looking at ethics in motion, real life happening in a webinar, just the way it ended up happening, as opposed to telling a story and reflecting on it. It was happening in real time. And it's, and yet I was trying to explain that this is something worthy of discussion, and it doesn't require that there's ill intent for it to require our attention and be open and discuss about it. We need to hold back our defenses a bit and actually lean in and have an open mind and go, let's talk about it. And you can do that. It doesn't imply that someone's trying to hurt someone necessarily, which is what people try to position it as. I think that there's some ill intent, as opposed to just being human and mucking it up.
Absolutely. I mean, there's lots and lots of ways where ethical decision making can go wrong, and the possibility that the person is simply saying, "I just don't care about the ethics involved," or "I just acknowledge that I'm an evil person and this is just the way I roll." They do happen. I mean, there's no point denying that that is a thing that happens in the world, and when it does happen, it is usually extremely harmful. But most of us won't make those moral errors. We'll make other moral errors, and they'll still be moral errors, and they will still impact in ways that we would wish they wouldn't on other people. And it won't be because we had bad intentions. It will just be because there is just a lot of different ways that ethical decision making, all the way from recognizing that this is a moral question I'm being faced with and understanding and formulating in your head exactly what the ethical problem is, which is like that's the first thing you've got to do. This little red flag has to go up into your head. You have to notice. And for someone like me, who is just naturally an extremely oblivious person, I just tend to wander through the world not noticing stuff that kind of leaps out at other people around me. That's often the first area that I'm going to fall at. I'm just not going to notice in a case where I really needed to be paying attention to something. So you've got to notice it in the first place. Then you've got to manage to think it through correctly, maybe by yourself, but hopefully with other people, and hopefully you're not too time pressured here. And sometimes you'll get this wrong just as you get the facts wrong, just because you're just operating on the basis of the belief you have about the state of affairs, and you've just reasoned it out wrong, or you were just badly informed. And sometimes, you'll just make a mistake in the moral maths, because we all have been there before, where we've thought one thing and it seemed right at the time, and in retrospect we've gone, no, I didn't get that one quite right. And then we can even just make mistakes on the basis of cognitive biases and all these other types of things that can rear their heads. And sometimes we just make mistakes through lack of experience. Because one of the things experience often teaches us is what the alternatives are. We're looking at an issue and we're thinking, I've got to do X or I've got to do Y, and both of them are bad, but I'm going to opt for Y because it's the least bad. You might be right, but there might have been Z as well. And the person who had the experience, they knew there was Z because they've been through this before, and they've realized that the way to go here is Z. So you've got all of those things, and that's even, then you've made the decision. You've still got to have the gumption, or whatever it takes, the fortitude, the courage, and sometimes, if we're talking about professionals, the competence, because sometimes you can make the correct call and you can just get it wrong when you go and execute it. So you've got to go and do all of that stuff. You've got to have the gumption to see it through, and then you've got to sort of execute it correctly. And so you can have problems at any one of those spots, and none of those spots included the possibility that you just didn't want to do the right thing. I mean, that's the thing that, as you say, people tend to hone in on, that it was ill intention at the time. It was that somebody just didn't want to do the right thing. Well, it does happen, but it happens way less than people think. There's so many ways that it's hard to hit the target of getting everything exactly right morally. And so most of the time when things are going wrong, it's often a failure in one of those other areas. It's not because somebody actually set out to be a bad person or simply doesn't care about being a good person. It's because we live in a complex world and we engage with very, very complex organizations, and ethics is just darn complicated. We're going to get some stuff wrong, and that's okay.
So let's hone in on you again. What do you consider to be your greatest impact professionally?
Professionally, so I guess it's a tricky one. I guess because I'm a researcher, I'm probably going to think that my biggest impact would be in my research. So it would be in sort of things I've done in terms of moral philosophizing, that are just new and original work, and that then other scholars can attend to and go, oh, that's okay, that's worthwhile. That's an important thing for us to be thinking about. Because I've worked on lots and lots of different areas over time, it means a lot of the work I do is sort of quite scattershot. So rather than a lot of moral philosophers who might be quite specialized in one particular area, I don't really have that. I've sort of moved from area to area, issue to issue. But what that does force of you is is a different type of perspective when you aren't just looking at one particular issue, and instead you're continually moving from one to another, and you're operating and you're trying to talk to people who are operating in that very complex world. Sort of the rough and tumble, coal face, difficult decisions, unclear information, and straitened resources, and they're having to do the best with what they have. And I think it does give you a different position, a different perspective on looking at the world ethically from what you might have if you are, able to sort of just specialize in one particular area. And so I think my main contribution, sort of philosophically, would be in things that have come out of that perspective. So one of the things that I'm sort of interested in, which is going to sound weird coming from an ethicist, but sometimes I think we focus too much on ethics. And sometimes I think the thing we should be focusing on is what I call legitimacy. And we used to legitimacy being something that we talk about when we think about laws and we think about constitutions and we think about political regimes. We're comfortable with using the term, well, was it a legitimate thing? Does this nation state have legitimacy? We use those terms a lot. We don't use anything exactly the same in our own or sort of ordinary lives. But I think that's probably a mistake, because I think a huge amount of the thinking that people actually do when they are in really complex environments and they're working in organizations actually has a lot more to do with notions of legitimacy than it has notions of ethics. So one of the things that worries me is that if somebody comes into a university and says, I want to learn more about ethics and doing the right thing, and thinking about these things, so I'm going to enroll in an introduction to ethics course. And they'll come into the course and we will teach them a bunch of stuff about ethics. We will teach them about utilitarianism and making the world a better place for everyone. And we'll teach them about deontology and Kant and acting in a way that could become a universal law. And we'll talk to them about Aristotle and virtue theory and what it means to be a perfected human being, a complete human being that has all of the virtues. And by the end of that, it may well be that the person comes away with a really pretty robust idea and a whole lot of good ways of thinking about the different dimensions that arise when they're faced with an ethical dilemma. And so they'll be well placed, all things going well, they'll be well placed to sort of sit back themselves and think to themselves when they have an ethical problem, here is what I think the right thing to do is. And I have a fair bit of confidence that those people will make that judgment pretty well, in a pretty well-informed way, I would say. But then what? Then what do they do?
Mm-hmm.
The judgment that they're making is bound to impact on other people who are going to need to have it explained to them. It's probably going to also implicate an organization, a local club they belong to, even the family, definitely their workplace. There are going to be people who disagree with the decision, who don't think that that's the right thing to do. What now? Well, you've got all this moral philosophy in the back pocket, so you can wheel it out and try and persuade them. But if anyone has actually tried to persuade someone to just dead set change their mind on a moral issue over the course of a half-hour discussion or something, just knows that this is just an incredibly rare thing to happen. It's just very, very difficult to change people's minds. There's lots of interesting reasons why that is the case, but it happens to absolutely everybody. We're all frustrated about the fact that nobody else changes their mind, but we're very, very comfortable with the fact that we don't change our minds when somebody just argues with us.
Because I'm always right, of course.
That's right. I'm right. The difference here is that I'm right when I'm persuading them, and I'm right when they're persuading me. So they get it wrong in both cases. And so the reality is that most of the time we're then thrown into having to think about things differently. We have to think of things like, gosh, I really thought this was the right thing to do. But you know what? The other people at work, Rodney and Jesse and Shirley, are all pretty smart people. They've thought about this a lot. They seem to me to be morally decent people in all of my interactions, and yet they have a different view to me. What do I do with that? how do I just, I mean, I've still come up with my view. I've still got the right opinion. I'm so confident in that. But it still seems a bit odd that I would just overrule them, that I would just force my right idea on all of them. Maybe that isn't the right way for me to go now. Maybe I should be doing things a bit differently. And it's here, I think, where we see the links with things like political legitimacy, because political legitimacy is something that just has to face this problem head on every day of the week. Every time someone has set up themselves as being the emperor of the city state or the ruler of the parliament or anything like that, is they have had to tell a story to try and persuade people to go along with what's happening, even though it is just absolutely the case that when they pass a law, there will just always be lots and lots of people who just disagree with that law. They just think it's the wrong law. They think there could have been a better law that was done. But if law is going to function, and almost everyone has a really strong vested interest in law being able to function, then somehow we have to have, if we can't get agreement on the substance of the law, because we're all human beings and we just have weird, diverse views, then we have to work out a way, maybe the process of the way the law is created. Maybe if we all got together and voted on the law, maybe that would work. Maybe if we all have a long discussion about it and we hear from the experts and what they have to say, and then we all deliberate for ourselves what that means, and then we all come to a discussion, maybe that would work. So all of those types of things that we're familiar with in the context of politics and law, in my view, they actually turn out to be absolutely crucial when we're just trying to navigate our own place in the world as part of an organization or as part of a club or as part of a family or a little friend group. All of the types of reasons we might want to talk about legitimacy for states and regimes turn out to also be really important tools if you're a human being who is just trying to engage with the world and do the right thing, but who becomes aware that it's not as simple as me just deciding what the right thing to do is and everybody else having to go along with that. That's just not the way the world works as a matter of fact. And it's probably not the way the world should work as a matter of morality. So I've got to think through more about the way that I treat people, even after I've come up with the right thing to do, which unfortunately makes ethical life a lot more complicated because there's lots more sort of steps and things we have to navigate. But at the same time, I think it actually gets much closer to the actual decision making of people on the ground who are having to make difficult decisions and are working in organizations that have learned over time. It's not just going to be enough to say it's my way or the highway. It's not even enough to say, hey, you're contractually obligated as my employee to do whatever I want. Sometimes that will work, and absolutely is true that contractual obligations and consent is an important part of what creates legitimacy. And that is absolutely something that should and does figure in people's moral decision makings when they're asked to do something that they are uncomfy with. Sometimes they will think to themselves, you know what, I agreed to this when I set out and when I took this employment on, I signed the contract. I'm not super happy with this, but I'm going to do it because of that. And other times they'll say, no, actually, this is intolerable enough. What I'm being asked to do is so bad that even though I did contractually sign up, I'm going to have to walk away now. I'm going to have to step away from that agreement I made because this is a bridge too far. And both of those thoughts, both of those different views are unquestionably correct in certain circumstances. And it's only really through thinking through stuff like legitimacy that we manage to navigate between them.
So how are you forming that up in your work in terms of having an impact in your thinking around legitimacy? Clearly, you've been thinking about it a lot because you can talk about it very well.
Yeah, so in terms of research work, it's something that I've increasingly been writing papers on and doing work on. So, for example, and some of it coming out of some sort of very practical discussions I had. One of the nice things about Griffith University is that it has links with sort of various governments and state government bureaucracies and public service people. And of course, one of the things that lots of different authorities and bodies are wrestling with now is the use of AI, because that's obviously a thing that's sort of really shaking up the world around us. And so one of those things, then one of those sort of questions that can arise in a practical discussion is, well, what will my client, or what would my, if I'm a public servant, say, the citizen that I'm sort of serving, that I'm in the business of trying to help them out medically or with social services in some way, what would they accept if they knew what I was doing with AI, that it was crunching all of the data that's coming from them, but that's helping them get much, much quicker services than they would otherwise get? What would their judgment be about that? And so again, that's a question of legitimacy. And so the a good place to start is to go, okay, what are the normal reasons that human beings find institutions and organizations to be legitimate? Even if they don't agree with everything they do, they go, no, it's fair enough. I'll go along with it. I'll tolerate what they're doing because I think on the whole, they're an okay system. They're doing the right thing. So if you know that about organizations, then that helps you know things about the ways you might use AI, where it might actually improve things in terms of legitimacy, and the ways you might use AI where people would go, oh, no, not like that. Sort of accountability is an obvious one. One of the wonderful things about going along to a professional is that they take responsibility for the final diagnosis that they give you, or the treatment plan, or the legal avenue that they're going to be going for. They're putting their credibility and their professional standing on the line when they say this is what you should be doing. The AI can't do that, and it can't be captured by our governance systems in the same way that a professional can. So that kind of leaves a gap in the normal way that governance system would be functioning. And so if your AI is standing there in that gap, then probably you have got big legitimacy problems. And you can say, oh, well, maybe it could be the AI designer or the person who rolled out the AI in the system. Maybe they could take the blame. And maybe sometimes that'll be the case, but often it really makes a big difference to have the person who's actually giving you the advice being the person who is taking responsibility, and their head is the one that will roll if they get this wrong, and they're sort of giving you the credence that this is the right thing by staking their reputation on it. That makes a big difference to the way the government system works. And so sort of that was, I guess, one of the ways in which it was like, okay, how can we operationalize this? And so that's some of the work I'm doing with a friend of mine who's at Macquarie University is trying to say, okay, if you are interested in this, in rolling out AI within government or within professional organizations or other ones, what are the ways in which, practically that's likely to work for you, and ways in which it might not?
Speaking about accountability and looking at your role in some of the projects that you do, when have you been challenged in relation to your accountability and say a lead role in one of the major projects, and how did it show up? So we know you're going to have thought about it very deeply. This I get, but I want to know about how it showed up for you and what went on for you, and then how you rode through it to the other end.
Yeah, so it's an important question because one of the main things that worries ethicists, especially ethicists if they're doing work for anyone else, is that they'll be drawn into ethics washing, which is to say, if an organization or an industry or even a government body or even a regulatory body or a professional organization, one of the things it can do if it's worried about scandals or it's been getting some bad press, is it can think to itself, I know, we'll enter into some sort of agreement or arrangement with a ethics person or an ethics institution, and that will give us a nice story to tell at the outset, and then maybe as well, if we can control what they're saying and we can get a bunch of good news stories coming out about the ethics of what we're doing, then that would be a good thing as well. And so it's probably the sort of the main one that we have to wrestle with. Most of the actual partners that we that we work with, usually that's an issue that either isn't a major problem or it's one that can be reasonably navigated. But there probably have been times where we've stepped away from potential projects because it just looked like the risks there. And it can be difficult to know ahead of time what the risks are going to look like and how you're going to wind up being positioned. But sometimes it can just look like the risks are going to be too dangerous. And obviously, in terms of accountability, it's sort of a bit odd as an academic as well, because suppose I was a bad ethicist. So suppose I was somebody that was pretty keen to sell out and to help somebody engaged in ethics washing, and probably could make some decent money from doing that. How would the governance system around me stop that from happening? And one of the things that does worry me is there isn't a huge amount of immediate accountability that could step in and be aware of that type of conflict of interest, the conflict of interest that I would have to give the person funding the group funding the research the answers that they want to hear. There's lots and lots of ways in which, as academics, we are made sure that we can't engage in nefarious goings on, and conflicts of interest are often, in many situations, are definitely something that our university governance systems are really good at looking out for. But that particular one is not one that they're really good at looking out for, and I think it would be better if it was improved. In the longer term, so I'm talking about immediate governance. In the longer term, it's not so much of an issue because as an academic, your standing as an academic and your indeed employment as an academic rests enormously on your peers and their opinion of you and what you are doing. So it obviously wouldn't be a sustainable way for somebody to go about doing this because their career would just collapse. But it's certainly as a sort of one-off thing. Somebody could work the system for maybe a year or two and do it very, very lucratively. So in terms of accountability, that's probably the main sort of worry with accountability that sort of does arise in the work of sort of ethics people like me, that you have to be really wary about those types of ethics washing possibilities. And sometimes just have to be willing to just step away and just decide, I just don't think that this is the right one for us to do. And it can be a complicated decision because, of course, because organizations that are having ethical problems are probably the ones that are going to be coming to you. People don't come to you when everything is tickety-boo and everyone loves them. That's not when they think to themselves, you know what we really need to do? We need to hire an ethicist to have a good look at the way our operations are happening and draw our attention to things that might be going wrong. That's just not a normal thing that's going to be on, organizational leaders or boards' minds. So often they are going to be coming to you when things are going wrong, and often it is going to take a fair bit of actual expertise to unpack what might be going on wrong here, and to work out ways in which it might be done better and ways in which the people, everyone involved might be better equipped to make ethical decisions, or to be able to act on the ethical decisions they make. So you sort of don't want to rule out people just because the organization is struggling a bit ethically, because that's exactly the reason why they might come to you and actually need the help. But at the same time, then sometimes you can think, oh no, I think that this is probably one that we're better off not going with because, just because there just is a risk to us that we wind up being part of the snow job that some organization is trying to pull on, on a vulnerable public. Yeah.
So projecting forward, what would you like to think that your impact or legacy has been on the world generally? Big question.
Oh, it's always good to try and think of legacies just as a moral matter. It often helps people think about the right things, think about the things that they should be focusing on, because that's just when you talk about legacies, people think about the imprint that they might have on the world and what they think is worthwhile, and they are both just great things ethically for people to be thinking about. So I suppose that obviously as a scholar, I'd be really hoping that the research ideas, the sorts of things I've been talking to you about, that they would wind up having an impact, and they would be of interest and importance for scholars for generations to come. Because I'm a philosopher, it is, we still read people like Plato and Aristotle. I don't think anyone's going to be reading me 2.5 millennia after my existence, but it would be nice if my ideas could make a little bit of an imprint on the way things are happening going forward, for a little while at least. And then I think in terms of impact on the wider world, it is, I guess, one of my ambitions is to be able to just help empower other people to think through ethical decisions themselves. And when I'm writing for a popular audience, I guess to try and be as fair-minded as I possibly can, and try and show all of the different dimensions that are in play, which normally is a roundabout way of saying that most of the time, most of the people involved here are not evil. The people who disagree with you on this moral issue or this political issue, there is a way of picturing it where their values and principles are not crazy, arcane things. They are quite understandable, and they are being correctly applied in this case. But they are principles that are a little bit different to yours, and you too are correctly applying your principles. You just haven't seen the dimensions of the problem that they are really worried about, and they haven't seen the dimensions of the problem that you think are really, really harmful, or maybe will be risky in the future, or some other way that it's concerning you but not them. And so I guess when I'm engaging with the public, I am trying to both let them see the wider perspective on the issues, but also to be a constructive person in that debate, who's saying, hey, here's a way that we can talk about things where we can be constructive, and we can treat everybody in the debate in a respectful way, even when we're disagreeing with them, even when we think what they're saying is really, really bad and harmful. There are still ways that terrain can be navigated, and if we try hard enough, and we learn enough from our experiences, then we can be able to do that. And so I guess that's sort of the impact I'd like to be able to have, for people to go, oh, I sort of can see how they were trying to do things in these debates, and I can see how that was a constructive and respectful way to do it. And I think I could do that a bit too. That would be a nice sort of legacy to be able to have had that little impact on the world around us. Yeah.
That kind of, for me, that kind of answers why you've been so supportive of my work across the space. It kind of marries quite well. So what do you think is the issue of the day that I don't want to hinge it on you in your work necessarily, just maybe broaden it out a little bit. Take it wherever you want in terms of the world. You've got the whole world to choose from. So what do you think is the issue of the day, and how do you think that you could help that?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, there's probably, lots of good answers to that question. So I'm just going to give my one.
Yep.
And so probably one of the things that worries me a lot is what I would call political intolerance. And maybe that follows from what I've just been saying. People, I think, are largely unaware of how damaging political intolerance has been throughout the years. As many people died in politicides in the 20th century as died in genocides. That is to say, for all of the Rwandas and the Holocausts, there was the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, and there was Stalin in Russia. Enormous amounts of slaughter have happened because people could not wrap their heads around the possibility that another person saw the world morally, politically, ethically differently to them, and that person would not be persuaded. Because most of us, as I mentioned before, it's pretty tough to persuade us out of our values. And the idea that somebody thinks differently to us isn't the end of the world if we think they're probably just maybe a bit misinformed. They're probably a bit naive. If I was able to actually explain the way things were to them, they probably would change their mind. They probably would come around. And then when we realize they wouldn't come around, that can be a really confronting thing for us to face. And there's lots of reasons why it's a confronting thing for us to face. Pretty deep-seated psychological ones to do with the confirmation bias that we all have, but also just to do with our sort of ego support. We like to believe that we're a very rational, reasonable person who has good reasons for the things that we do, who thinks logically and carefully and rationally about lots of things. And then when we're confronted with somebody who seems to be similar in all of those respects, they're intelligent, thoughtful, well-informed, but come to different conclusions, that's a pretty confronting thing, because it means that maybe my conclusions and my ideas aren't quite as perfectly rational as I thought. They might still be, to use a word I've used earlier, they might still be legitimate in some sense. But it might not be. It might be that they are not quite as perfectly justified as I thought they were. Often it's easier and better for our sort of psychological health to just think, no, it's probably that the person I'm talking to is just awful. That's probably an easier thing for me to think right now than that this is just somebody who's had different experiences, who has different perspectives on a bunch of things, and they're playing out in this issue in a way that means they have a very diametrically opposed position to me. But if we actually sat down and chatted about a lot of different subjects, it probably would be the case that in 98% of cases we agree on exactly what the right and correct thing to be done is. But it's just cases like this where we actually have some really profound disagreements. And unfortunately, we don't tend to think like that. And so we tend to think that there's really something going badly wrong when somebody thinks differently to me. And it really is okay for me to behave in an intolerant way against them by shutting them down or cancelling them or voting into power somebody that's going to shut their institutions down or doing any of those types of things. And I think that's probably what I see as being the most sort of big worrying feature of the world that I'm looking at here, because of course intolerance breeds intolerance. If one side starts behaving very, very poorly to another side simply on the basis of their political values, then one thing you can guarantee is that the side that's on the receiving end of that treatment there'll be a backlash. They will start trying to do the same thing. They will start hitting back, and then the other side will escalate, because that's the way these things go. And it really does take sort of a lot of virtue in terms of sort of courage and humility, but also sometimes a sort of certain amount of just experience to know that this is not the right way to go, and that the world is a much better place if we can acknowledge that other people think differently than we do, not just about religion, but also about ethics and politics and other things that are much more tractable rationally. And that's something that we can actually live with and work around. We don't need to convert them. They don't need to convert us. And we definitely don't need to, to punish them for their beliefs or for acting on their beliefs, except in cases where there's a law and they're sort of overstressing, they're breaching or violating that, in which case that we want the democratic systems and the legal systems to do what they are, to do what they do. But generally speaking, I think we all need to be a lot more understanding, a lot more forgiving of other people's views, and just acknowledge that often they have really good and legitimate reasons for doing the things that they're doing, and that that's something that change does happen, but it often means that change happens a lot more slowly than we would like, because it takes a while for people to come around and start seeing things in a different way. So
Mhm.
yeah, sort of that's the way I see it.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about your early career and where you're at now. And I'm wondering, has it influenced how you go about your work now in any way? Is there a flow through it all that anytime you say
From
from your writing to your acting, is there a flow through?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I still do a little bit more than dabble in the fiction writing these days. So I actually published my first novel in 2021, The Beautiful Fall, um, and it's a love story, which makes sense because my wife is in fact a romance writer. So I've read a huge amount of romance over the years, probably a lot more than a normal person of my demographic might have read. Um, but it's a very philosophical one in that it's about a person who knows that they have recurring amnesia and are about to lose their memory in 12 days. And they're counting down to that time while they're falling in love with someone. So it's it sort of manages to wrap up my sort of philosophical
Mhm.
interests and my interests in sort of drama and fiction and writing. So I still do a little bit of that. I don't know if the writing influences the other way. I don't know that if I um, look at moral problems differently because I have that creative background. I do think that one of the things that things like creative writing, but also things like role playing, do is they do help you exercise your empathy, and I think that that is a helpful thing. And I think probably a fair bit of, and sometimes people remark to me that when they look at an interaction and they see perhaps an authority figure treating another person in a particular way,
Mhm.
and they're really able to empathize and sympathize with the person on the receiving end. And there's good reasons why that's a natural reaction for people to have, and usually very healthy reactions for people to have. Hume spends multiple books talking about exactly this, why we would react in that way. Um, but it is also really useful to be able to try and imagine yourself into the place of that authority figure or of that person that is trying to navigate this situation, because it is one of those things that makes you realize, well, maybe they're a bad person, and again, there are bad people, and they often do get into power and do bad things. But at the same time, they might be in a very, very complicated position, operating on very, very limited information, extremely ambiguous signals coming in, and only have a selection of options that they think are all bad, and they're going with the best one they have, or something like that. So I think if you are a writer, and you are trying to imagine a world, that sort of skill is just a non-negotiable. You can't just be looking at the world purely from the perspective of your main character and interpreting everything that happens purely from their perspective, because otherwise the other characters simply won't be behaving consistently and sensibly given what they know and how they picture the world. So it is something where you actually just do need to be able to go, okay, there's four people in this scene, and I need to be able to throw myself into all of them, even some of them that are quite crummy people, perhaps. I need to be able to give an account of the way the situation looks to them, and I think that for the type of ethics work I do, at least, is something that is helpful to me, because it does mean that if I'm trying to work out how we can get better ethical outcomes in a situation, I'm looking for all of the reasons why, even though that this was a mostly good person, mostly trying to do the right thing, we may have had, a really bad outcome, and what might be the ways of changing that and fixing that system without it being the case that this person is necessarily a bad person and is to blame and should be punished. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's off the top of my head. That's probably, I think, the main way that type of creative and sort of fiction writing exercise and capability impacts on the way I do the ethics work that I do.
And enhanced capacity to take a broad perspective, and not just land in one spot and get blinked.
Hmm.
Yeah. Thank
Yeah, just to be able to just to be able to think through, positions of authority are often like just awful places to inhabit. Even the first time, one of the reasons I don't like marking philosophy essays, one of the things I really didn't like about teaching is just the sheer weight of responsibility that rests on your shoulders. When an undergraduate is writing for philosophy for the first time and they're trying to put their ideas down on paper, it's not an easy thing that they're doing. And when you're reading what they're doing, it can be hard to think, well, hang on, is this person just a slapdash thinker and they've just put down a bunch of ideas the day before and they've really not thought things through? Or is this someone who has thought really, really hard about this and they are having trouble expressing
you.
what they've thought about, but they have thought about it deeply and have actually hit upon some stuff that is really important and really impressive, but they are just struggling to make sure that that comes through on the paper because it's just hard to write well and write well philosophically. And that's just a lot of responsibility to have on your shoulders if you're marking every one of 86 essays that have all got to be marked before 4 days time, and half the time you're struggling with that responsibility of getting it right. I mean, sometimes authority just sucks. You just don't want it. Let somebody else do that job, because I really worry that I'm going to get it wrong in some cases, and that it's going to matter when I get it wrong, because somebody's going to get maybe a bad mark that they didn't deserve, and they'd be discouraged from doing the philosophical work that they've been doing, and maybe think, oh, this isn't for me, and all because Hugh just wasn't concentrating enough when he was doing that particular work at that particular time. Now maybe I'm like overthinking this more than I should, but
Actually, it has.
authority is not a pleasant place to be sometimes.
No, but it also has me wonder specifically about that marking example of philosophical papers, that perhaps the traditional way of examining them doesn't fit. Maybe we need to find a different way to actually allow these students to grow into it and have a longer exam assessment time that actually includes more reflection even on their own work. That's the thing that's
Hmm.
in my mind, as
Yeah,
opposed to
honestly,
go and do this and that's what it's got to be and you just got to land it now. No, the learning comes when they look back on it.
yeah, honestly, that is a way. I've been in the company of some very good philosophy teachers and lecturers, and some of them do exactly this. So they will create this system where, okay, you're going to do your assessment, your essay at one point, then you're going to get some feedback on it. Then you're
Mm.
going to go back and look at what you've written on the basis of that feedback, and then you're going to explain how you would change what you've done, or how you might change your position, or the ways in which you might go. And I think they're right, and you're right. I mean, philosophy is much more that sort of discursive, deliberative, conversational way of engaging, where it's not sort of like something you're just doing and it's done. It is much more a process of working through something and then hearing what other people have to say, and then thinking through how what you have said have landed with them, and the way they interpreted things that you thought were perhaps clear weren't clear to them. All of those things are like really good learning experiences, and then can be part of that dialogue. Then is what makes the philosophy come to life.
So great to hear people are taking up different models of assessment then. So we're closing off now, and I'm just wondering, you've left like even me and no doubt whoever's listening to this so much to like listen to again and again, to think, to take it all on board. Just a couple of points to close off. What would you like to leave everyone, including me, with?
Let's see. I guess just to have a thought about some of the ideas I had about I talked about in terms of legitimacy,
Mhm.
and just that notion that when you've thought through how things make sense to you and you've come to your own ethical position, that's really good. That's a really good step that you've done, but your ethical work isn't yet done. You still have to think through, okay, what would be the fair and reasonable and appropriate way for me, on the basis of my decision, to engage with the people around me who might have different views or might not understand my view or might need to have it explained to them, all of those types of things, to just make sure that if you've done so much right in doing some serious ethical thinking about, okay, what should we be doing here, that you don't fall at the next hurdle, which is, we need to get a group on board that needs to everyone in my organization or my little team, or even just in my family, we need to get them on board with this. Okay, what are the ethical ways that we might be able to do that? And that's sort of a different and another question. And it's one that's really good one to be thinking about.
Well, thank you so much. I know it's getting later there over on the east coast of Australia, so I'm happy that we're able to get this call happening, and since it was delayed, but that's fine. And thank you so much. You've given me lots to think about, and no doubt everyone else. So
Oh, terrific. It's been great to chat. Thanks, Wendy-Ann.